Welcome. This is another series of videos about Paul and his letters and things that are background for it. Today we're looking at the Epistles of Paul, and we're looking at the form of his letters. There is really no understanding how Paul might have looked. I've included a few pictures. One's an icon and one's perhaps a modern-day picture. Below in this picture, there is an example of a fragment of a parchment to see how fragile that would have been and how we need to know exactly the challenges of the writing. First of all, we'll look at ancient letter writing. Who did it? Why was it done? To whom letters were written? Second, we'll look at the rhetorical letters of Aristotle, Cicero, Quinoline versus Paul letters. The rhetorical letters are still being used in today's world to convince people in judicial cases, to sway people in public forums, or to convince people to do something in the future. Thirdly, we'll look at Paul's use of the styles of other Greco-Roman philosophers to catch the attention of his audience. We'll look at emotions in Paul's epistles and how we should really deal with the fact Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, the first letter and the second letters, are dripping with emotions of a pastor. And lastly, we will look at histories in Roman times versus Acts. Let's begin with part one. The Epistles of Paul, the format of the letters. Who wrote the letters? It was families, patrons, clients, equals. And you have an example of these letters. The people who wrote letters in Rome were of many civil classes. They went from the emperor to consuls to praetors, and that's from top down, to a senator, to a quaestor, to free men, free women, freedmen, free women, non-Romans, and slaves if they were literate. And many times slaves were sent in dangerous assignments to carry the letters or to write letters. So you will see the emperors Claudius, Romo, and the Gallio, the Corinthian proconsul, might have written letters. Now, what is the relationships? As you may have seen in the oligarchy presentation, there's a patron and client relationship where the patron gives money, employment, perhaps grain, food, tools, and the client reciprocates with an obligation to publicize favor, loyalty, and prefer services. That relationship gives you a particular situation where the client wants to respond, wants to praise the letter. Now, there could also be where there was a military reign. Remember, the emperor was political and military. He might write to a consul who is in who is a senior Roman magistrate who ruled a senatorial or unknown provinces. You can recognize these people in pictures or illustrations of Roman times by a purple cloak. A consul might write to a praetor who ruled imperial Roman palaces, who might have been a formal legate. He might write to a legate who was a member of the senatorial. He might write to a junior magistrate, or he might write to a military tribune. Again, war, business, it was all the same for Rome because it advanced. Lictors, attendants of magistrates, were a civil role, and they might be written to. Centurions with 100 men might be written to. Now, as you get to Victorian or Auteur, these may or may not be literate, and but a thesaurus, the man who circulated wax tablets of the daily watchword to the centuries and ranks prior to a battle, he probably was literate. So you see that literation was all the way down. Soldiers, if they weren't conscripted. Now let's look at examples of letters within families, between patrons and clients, between social equals and friends. Maybe There's also letters that were between philosophers and their students or other philosophers. And as I've mentioned, there were military reports. Here's a picture of a letter from a son to a father. The son is in the Roman army, and it's Appian, and he's writing to his father, Epimas. Now notice the fragment on the parchment is carefully written, and you can still see some of the letters. But, you know, fragments as we've gone on. Let's look at one of the famous writers, a very entertaining, Pliny the Younger to a patron. He says to Paternus, I rely very much on the soundness of your judgment, so I do upon the goodness of your eyes, not because I think your discerning is very great, for I don't want to make you conceited, but because I think it is good as mine, which it must be confessed is saying a great deal. Well, joking aside, I like the look of the slaves which you purchased for me on your recommendation very well. I further care about that they be honest, for I depend on their characters much more than their countenance. Notice his sense of humor. There might be that type of relationship. Now, Pliny, as a mediator to a patron, I know you eagerly embraced every opportunity of obliging me, so there is no man I'd rather be under obligation to. I apply to you, therefore, in preference to anyone else, for a favor I am extremely desirous of obtaining. You are commander-in-chief of a very considerable army, have many opportunities of exercising your generosity, and the length of time you've enjoyed in that post have enabled you to provide for all your own friends. I hope now you will turn your eyes upon some of mine, as they indeed are but few. Your generous disposition, I know, would be better pleased if the numbers were greater. But one or two will suffice for my modest desires. At the present I mention only Boconius Romanus. His father was of great distinction among the Roman knights, and his father-in-law, I might properly call him his second father, for his affectionate treatment of Boconius entitles him to that appellation, is still more conspicuous. His mother is one of the most considerable ladies of Spain. You know what character the people of that province bear, and how remarkable they are for the strictness of the number. As for himself, he held the post of flamen. Now, from this time forward, when we were students together, I have felt very attached to him. Notice the sort of warm thing. And as a social equal, Pliny the underwrite. Ah, you are a pretty fellow. You make an engagement to come to supper and then never appear. Justice shall be exacted. You shall reimburse me to the very last penny the expense I went to on your account. No small sum, let me tell you. I had prepared, you must know, a lettuce apiece, 3 snails, 2 eggs, a barley cake, and some sweet wine and snow. The snow most certainly I will charge you as a rarity that will not keep. Olives, beetroot, scards, onions, and 1,000 other dainties equally sumptuous. You likewise have been entertained with either an interlude, a rehearsal of a poem, or a piece of music, or whichever you preferred. For such was my liberality of all 3. But oysters, sow bellies, urchins, dancers' kids, I know not who, it seems, were more to your taste. You shall give satisfaction, how at the present be a secret. Oh, you have behaved cruelly, grudgingly to your friend. As you said yourself, upon second thought, I do say in this way, how grievously we should have spent the evening in trifling, and literary amusement. You may sup, I confess it, many places more splendidly, but nowhere with more unconstrained mirth, simplicity, and freedom. Only make the experiment, and if you do not, after excuse yourself to other friends, come to me. Always put me off to go to them. Farewell. What a fun piece. Well, after that bit of entertainment, I hope that we can go next into the formal portions of the letters, looking at the format as defined by the great rhetoricians, Aristotle, Cicero, Quintilian, and comparing them against Paul. I hope this has been enjoyable, as it has been for me, and I look forward to chatting with you again.